The first shot rang out just as Samuel Reed rode his dappled gray mare into Whispering Pines, a dusty frontier town perched on the edge of Colorado Territory in the spring of 1875. His hand instinctively dropped to the Colt revolver on his hip, but he relaxed when he realized it was just some drunken fool firing into the air outside the saloon. Samuel hadn't come for trouble, he'd come for supplies. Dust swirled around his boots as he dismounted in front of Holcomb's General Store, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. 6 months alone at his homestead in the foothills had left him with a beard reaching halfway down his chest and clothes that had seen better days. He hadn't planned on speaking more than necessary to anyone, get what he needed, and be back at his cabin before nightfall tomorrow. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, hat in hand. The store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco, a welcome change from the pine and dirt scent of his solitary existence. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, stranger. What can I help you with?" Samuel cleared his throat, his voice rusty from disuse. "Need flour, coffee, sugar, salt pork, ammunition for a Winchester, and some new shirts if you've got 'em." The shopkeeper nodded and began gathering the items. Samuel wandered the narrow aisles, mentally calculating what he could afford. His last cattle sale had been good, but winter had been harsh. He'd need to be careful with his money. "You must be from up in the foothills," the shopkeeper said conversationally. "Don't recall seeing you in town before." "Got a place about a day's ride northwest," Samuel answered, not offering more. A commotion outside drew their attention, raised voices, something falling, a woman's cry of distress. Samuel instinctively moved toward the window. "Oh, not again," the shopkeeper muttered. "That's Frank Tillman. Third time this week he's hassled Miss Emma." Through the dusty glass, Samuel saw a burly man with a red face gripping a young woman's arm. She was trying to pull away, her basket of goods spilled across the dirt street. Her honey-colored hair had come loose from its pins, and even from this distance, Samuel could see the fire in her eyes as she stood her ground. "Let go of me, Mr. Tillman," she demanded, loud enough to be heard through the glass. "I've told you a dozen times I'm not interested in your proposal." "You ain't got much choice, Emma," the man slurred. "Your pa left you with nothing but debts. I'm offering you a way out." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough of this kind of thing to know it never ended well for the woman. "That's Miss Whitaker," the shopkeeper explained. "School teacher. Her father passed 6 months back, left her the house, but also a mountain of debt. Tillman's been after her ever since, wants her land, and..." He trailed off, uncomfortable. "She's a good woman, keeps to herself, teaches the children, doesn't deserve this." Samuel set his hat back on his head. "Finish gathering my supplies, I'll be back." Before the shopkeeper could respond, Samuel was out the door and crossing the street with long, purposeful strides. He didn't consider himself anyone's savior, but he'd never been able to stand by when a woman was being threatened. "The lady said to let go," Samuel said quietly as he approached, his voice carrying that particular kind of calm that suggested violence simmering just beneath the surface. Tillman turned, his meaty face contorted with anger. "Mind your own business, stranger. I'm making it my business." Samuel kept his hands loose at his sides, not reaching for his weapon, but making sure Tillman could see it on his hip. The woman Emma used the distraction to wrench her arm free and step back, rubbing the spot where Tillman's fingers had dug into her flesh. "You don't know who you're messing with," Tillman growled, but Samuel noticed his eyes darting nervously to the gun. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Samuel replied evenly. "A man who can't take no for an answer. Now walk away before this gets unpleasant." A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with interest. Tillman looked around, realized he was losing face, and spat in the dirt. "This ain't over," he muttered, then stomped off toward the saloon. Samuel tipped his hat to Emma. "Madam." He turned to go back to the store, but her voice stopped him. "Wait, please." Samuel paused, turning back to face her. Up close, she was even more striking, not conventionally beautiful perhaps, but something about her clear green eyes and determined expression caught him off guard. She was young, but not too young, mid-20s, he guessed, and carried herself with a quiet dignity. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Reed, Samuel Reed, Emma Whittaker." She extended her hand, which he took briefly. Her skin was soft, but her grip was firm. "I appreciate your intervention, though I fear you may have made an enemy of Mr. Tillman." Samuel shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first." He knelt to help her gather the items that had fallen from her basket: a book, some paper, pencils, an apple. As he handed them back, their fingers brushed, and he felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. "You're the school teacher?" he asked, rising to his full height again. She nodded. "For the past 3 years." She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Tillman wasn't lying about one thing. My father did leave me with considerable debts, and the bank is threatening to take our home. It's why he thinks I'll eventually accept his proposal." "But you won't." A flash of steel in those green eyes. "I would sooner live in a tent." Samuel almost smiled. "Almost. Good day, Miss Whittaker." He tipped his hat again and returned to the general store. By the time he'd finished his business, the sun was beginning to set. He'd intended to make camp outside of town, but a spring storm was brewing on the horizon. The shopkeeper, Harold Holcomb, he'd learned, recommended the boarding house run by Widow Perkins at the edge of town. "Clean beds, fair prices, and she serves the best breakfast west of the Mississippi," Holcomb assured him. Samuel thanked him and headed in that direction, leading his mare. The town was small enough that it didn't take long to find a 2-story white house with green shutters and a well-tended garden. A sign out front read, "Perkins Boarding House, Respectable Lodging." The widow who answered the door was a plump, pleasant woman with silver hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. She looked Samuel up and down, taking in his trail-worn appearance. "You look like you could use a hot bath, a good meal, and a soft bed in that order," she said frankly. "I can provide all 3 for $2. Samuel nodded, reaching for his money. "That would be appreciated, madam. We serve supper at 6 sharp, she informed him as she showed him to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Bath's out back. I'll have hot water ready in half an hour." True to her word, by the time Samuel had settled his mare in the small stable and brought up his saddlebags, there was steaming water waiting in the bathhouse. He stripped off layers of trail dust and grime, savoring the luxury of hot water and soap. By the time he dressed in his cleanest remaining clothes and trimmed his beard to a more manageable length, he almost felt human again. The dining room of the boarding house held a long table that could seat 12, though tonight there were only 4 other guests: a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, and, to his surprise, Emma Whittaker. She looked up as he entered, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Reed." "Miss Whittaker." He nodded politely as the widow directed him to a seat across from Emma. "You two know each other?" Mrs. Perkins asked, serving generous portions of beef stew and fresh bread. "Mr. Reed came to my aid this afternoon when Frank Tillman was being persistent," Emma explained. Mrs. Perkins clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That man, the marshal, ought to do something about him." She patted Samuel's shoulder. "Good for you, young man. We look after our own in Whispering Pines." "I'm just passing through, madam," Samuel corrected her gently. "Here for supplies, then heading back to my place tomorrow." "Where is your place, if you don't mind me asking?" Emma inquired, breaking off a piece of bread. Samuel hesitated. He wasn't used to conversation, especially with a woman as direct as Emma Whittaker. "I've got a small ranch northwest of here, nothing fancy, just me and about 60 head of cattle." "Sounds lonely," she observed. He shrugged. "I prefer it that way." The others at the table engaged in their own conversations, leaving Samuel and Emma in a small bubble of privacy. "How long have you been on your own?" she asked. 5 years at that homestead. Before that I drifted, fought in the war, did some cattle driving, tried my hand at mining. Nothing stuck until I found that piece of land." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I understand the appeal of solitude. After teaching 20 children all day, sometimes all I want is quiet." 20 children, Samuel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds worse than facing down a grizzly." A smile transformed her serious face, lighting up her eyes. "They're good children, mostly. Though Tommy Jenkins did put a frog in my desk drawer yesterday." Despite himself, Samuel felt the corner of his mouth twitch. And what did you do? Named it Frederick and made it the class pet, Emma replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. Tommy was so disappointed. Samuel couldn't help the chuckle that escaped him, surprising even himself. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. The rest of the meal passed in surprisingly easy conversation. Samuel learned that Emma had come west from Boston with her parents as a child, that she loved teaching despite the challenges, and that she had an extensive collection of books, her most prized possessions. My father always said that even when you have nothing else, you have the world's inside books, she told him, a shadow crossing her face at the mention of her father. He sounds like a wise man. Emma's smile turned sad. He was, just not very practical when it came to money. He was always chasing the next big opportunity, sure that this would be the one to make our fortune. And now you're left with his debts, Samuel said quietly. She nodded. The bank is giving me until the end of the month. After that. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. But I'll find a way, I always do. Samuel found himself admiring her resilience. He knew firsthand how hard it was to make a living in this unforgiving country, especially for a woman alone. After dinner, the other guests retired to their rooms, but Samuel found himself following Emma to the small parlor where she settled with a book. "Do you mind?" he asked, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. She looked surprised but pleased. "Not at all." Samuel sat, stretching his long legs toward the small fire crackling in the grate. Outside, rain had begun to fall, drumming against the windows. "You said your ranch is a day's ride from here," Emma said, closing her book. "Do you often come to town?" "Every few months for supplies." "I try to avoid it when I can." "Why is that?" Samuel considered her question. "Most people talk too much and say too little," he finally answered. "And yet here you are talking to me," she pointed out. "You're different," he said before he could stop himself. A flush colored her cheeks. "I'm really not, just an ordinary schoolteacher in an ordinary town." "There's nothing ordinary about standing up to a man twice your size when he's trying to force you into marriage," Samuel countered. Emma's eyes flashed. "What would you have me do? Submit, become Mrs. Frank Tillman just to keep a roof over my head? Most women would." "I'm not most women." "No," Samuel agreed quietly. "You're not." They fell silent, the only sounds the crackling fire and the rain outside. Samuel found himself studying her profile as she gazed into the flames, the straight nose, the stubborn chin, the wisps of honey-colored hair escaping her simple bun. Something about her tugged at him, made him want to know more. "What will you do," he asked, "if the bank takes your house?" Emma sighed. "I've been offered a teaching position in Denver. It would mean leaving Whispering Pines, but," she shrugged, "life goes on. The children here would miss you, and I them." Her eyes met his. "What about you, Mr. Reed? What are your plans?" Samuel hadn't thought beyond the next season in years. "Keep the ranch going, maybe expand the herd if I can. All alone." The question hit him harder than it should have. Yes, all alone. That was how he preferred it, wasn't it? After losing his family in the war, after the betrayals and heartbreaks that followed, he'd sworn off attachments. Alone was safer. Alone meant no one could hurt you. "It's simpler that way," he said finally. Emma studied him for a long moment. "Simpler, perhaps, but is it better?" Before he could answer, the front door burst open with a crash, and Frank Tillman stumbled into the parlor, soaking wet and clearly drunk. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Emma, then shifted to Samuel. "Well, well," he slurred. "Mighty cozy, ain't you? The high and mighty schoolteacher and the stranger." He swayed on his feet, pointing an accusatory finger. "You turned me down for him." Samuel rose slowly to his feet, positioning himself between Emma and Tillman. "You're drunk, Tillman. Go home. Don't tell me what to do in my own town," Tillman roared, reaching for the gun at his hip. Samuel moved faster, his Colt appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Don't." Tillman froze, his hand hovering over his holster. For a tense moment, the only sound was the rain and Tillman's heavy breathing. Mrs. Perkins appeared in the doorway, a shotgun in her hands. "Frank Tillman, you get out of my house this instant, or I swear I'll fill you so full of buckshot your own mother wouldn't recognize you." Tillman's eyes darted between Samuel's steady gun hand and the widow's determined expression. Finally, he backed away. "This ain't over," he growled, echoing his words from earlier that day. "Not by a long shot." He staggered back into the rainy night. Mrs. Perkins lowered her shotgun with a huff. "I'm sorry about that. He's never forced his way in here before." "It's my fault," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. "He's fixated on me." "Nonsense," Mrs. Perkins declared. "The only person responsible for Frank Tillman's behavior is Frank Tillman." She looked at Samuel appraisingly. "You've got quick reflexes, Mr. Reed." Samuel holstered his weapon, his expression grim. "He'll be back, and next time he might not be alone." "I should go," Emma said, rising from her chair. "I don't want to cause any more trouble." "You'll do no such thing," Mrs. Perkins insisted. "It's pouring rain, and it's not safe for you to be alone tonight. You'll stay right here where Mr. Reed and I can keep an eye on things." Emma looked like she wanted to protest, but then nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs." Perkins excused herself to lock up the house, leaving Samuel and Emma alone again. "I'm sorry to have involved you in my problems," Emma said quietly. Samuel shook his head. "You didn't involve me, I involved myself." He hesitated, then added, "I should check on my horse. Lock your door tonight." Emma nodded, her green eyes troubled. "Be careful, Mr. Reed. Frank Tillman has friends in town." "I can handle myself," he assured her, though her concern warmed something inside him that had been cold for a very long time. The rain had eased to a gentle patter by the time Samuel made his way to the small stable behind the boarding house. His mare nickered softly as he approached, and he spent a few minutes checking on her, making sure she was comfortable. As he turned to leave, a shadow moved near the entrance. Samuel's hand dropped to his gun. "Show yourself." A man stepped into the dim light cast by Samuel's lantern. He wore a sheriff's badge. "Easy there, I'm Marshal Dawson." Samuel relaxed slightly but kept his hand near his weapon. "Marshal." Mrs. Perkins sent word about the disturbance. "Thought I should check in." The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s with a gray mustache and shrewd eyes. "You must be the stranger who stood up to Frank Tillman today. Word travels fast. Small town." The marshal sized him up. "You passing through?" That was the plan. Was. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure why he'd phrased it that way himself. "Frank Tillman's got a mean streak a mile wide," the marshal continued when Samuel didn't respond. "And he's got 3 or 4 men who follow him around like dogs. Been trying to buy up land all around town, including the Whitaker place." "Why not arrest him for harassment?" The marshal's mouth twisted. "His brother-in-law's the mayor, politics." He spat the word like it tasted bad. "I do what I can, but my hands are tied unless he breaks the law in a way I can't ignore. Like forcing his way into the boarding house. He'll claim he was too drunk to know what he was doing, and without Mrs. Perkins pressing charges which she won't because she's afraid of retaliation. There's not much I can do." The marshal studied Samuel. "You handy with that gun?" Samuel met his gaze steadily. "I am. I thought so." The marshal nodded. "Well, just so you know, self-defense is recognized in this territory. If a man comes at you with intent to do harm, you have the right to protect yourself." Samuel understood what the marshal was really saying. "Good to know." The marshal touched the brim of his hat. "Sleep well, Mr. Reed." "Samuel Reed, Reed." The marshal nodded. "Welcome to Whispering Pines." After the marshal left, Samuel returned to his room, though he doubted he would get much sleep. He placed his gun on the nightstand within easy reach and sat on the edge of the bed, thinking he'd come to town for supplies. Simple. In and out. Now he was embroiled in someone else's problems: a beautiful schoolteacher with too much pride and too little money, a drunken bully with power in town, and a marshal who couldn't or wouldn't enforce the law. It wasn't his fight. Tomorrow, he'd load up his supplies and head back to his ranch where things were simple and quiet. Emma Whitaker would have to solve her own problems. He couldn't get involved, couldn't let himself care. Yet as he lay down on the surprisingly comfortable bed, Samuel found his thoughts returning to Emma's direct green gaze, her courage in the face of Tillman's threats, the way her smile transformed her face. For the first time in years, he fell asleep thinking of someone other than himself. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Samuel rose early, as was his habit, and made his way downstairs to find Mrs. Perkins already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "Coffee's hot," she said by way of greeting. "Eggs and bacon will be ready shortly." "Thank you." Samuel poured himself a cup and sat at the kitchen table. "Any trouble during the night?" "Not a peep," she replied, "though I slept with my shotgun close at hand." The back door opened, and Emma walked in, looking fresh and composed in a simple blue dress, her honey-colored hair neatly pinned up. Samuel was struck again by how her presence seemed to brighten the room. "Good morning," she said, smiling at both of them. "It seems we survived the night without incident." "So we did," Mrs. Perkins agreed, setting a platter of eggs and bacon on the table. "Eat up, both of you." Nothing solves problems like a full stomach. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Emma spoke. "Mr. Reed, may I ask a favor of you?" Samuel looked up wary. "What kind of favor?" "Would you walk me to the schoolhouse? It's not far, but after last night." She trailed off, looking embarrassed at having to ask. "Of course," Samuel found himself agreeing before he'd even thought about it. After breakfast, they set out together down the main street of Whispering Pines. The town looked different in the morning light, less threatening, more ordinary. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, a wagon loaded with lumber rattled past, and the blacksmith's forge was already smoking. "I appreciate the escort," Emma said as they walked. "I'm not usually so easily frightened, but Mr. Tillman was particularly aggressive yesterday. It's no trouble." Samuel walked beside her, conscious of the curious glances they were receiving from townspeople. "When do you plan to leave?" Emma asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Today, once I've collected my supplies from Holcomb's." She nodded, looking straight ahead. "I see." They reached the schoolhouse, a modest white building with a bell tower, set back from the main street with a small yard in front where children could play during breaks. "This is me," Emma said, stopping at the steps. "Thank you for walking with me." Samuel nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Will you be all right?" "Of course." "Once the children arrive, Mr. Tillman wouldn't dare cause a scene," she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Safe travels back to your ranch, Mr. Reed." "Samuel," he corrected her. "Given the circumstances, you might as well use my given name." Her smile warmed. "Samuel, then, and I'm Emma." "Emma." He liked the way her name felt on his tongue. "Take care of yourself. You as well." She hesitated, then added, "Perhaps next time you come to town for supplies, you'll stop by and let me know how you're faring." Samuel found himself nodding. "Perhaps I will." He waited until she was safely inside the schoolhouse before turning back toward the general store. His plan was clear: collect his supplies, load up his mare, and head home. Yet as he walked, he found himself in no hurry to leave Whispering Pines, or, more accurately, to leave Emma Whittaker. At Holcomb's, Samuel found his supplies ready and waiting. As he was preparing to pay, the shopkeeper leaned across the counter. "Heard about the trouble at the boarding house last night," Holcomb said in a low voice. "Tillman's on the warpath. Word is he's gathering his boys for something." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What kind of something?" Holcomb shrugged. "Don't know for sure. But he was in here earlier buying rope and kerosene. Nothing good comes from that combination." A cold feeling settled in Samuel's stomach. "Where can I find the marshal?" "Office is down the street, but he rode out early this morning. Some trouble at a ranch outside town." Samuel swore under his breath. "When will he be back?" "Hard to say. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow." Samuel stared at his supplies, thinking hard. He should leave. This wasn't his problem, but the thought of Emma facing whatever Tillman had planned alone. "I'll come back for these later," he told Holcomb. The shopkeeper nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll keep them ready." Samuel headed back toward the schoolhouse, his long strides eating up the distance. Through the windows, he could see Emma at the front of the room, pointing to something on a blackboard. About 15 children of various ages sat at desks, some paying attention, others passing notes or staring out the windows. He hesitated, not wanting to interrupt her class. Instead, he settled on a bench outside the schoolhouse to wait, keeping a watchful eye on the street. The morning passed slowly. Around noon, the children spilled out of the schoolhouse for their lunch break, their excited voices filling the air. Emma appeared in the doorway, surprise registering on her face when she saw Samuel. You're still here, he stood as she approached. Heard some talk in town, Tillman's planning something? Concern flashed across her features. What kind of something? Don't know exactly. But he bought rope and kerosene this morning. Emma paled slightly. Oh, is there somewhere you can go, someone who can take you in for a few days until the marshal returns? She shook her head. I can't abandon my students, and I won't be driven from my home by threats. Her chin lifted stubbornly. I've dealt with bullies before. Not like this, Samuel insisted. Tillman's dangerous, especially when he's been drinking. So what do you suggest? Samuel hadn't thought that far ahead. I could stay just until the marshal gets back. Emma's eyes widened. But your ranch, the cattle can survive another day or two without me. Why would you do that for me? You barely know me. Samuel couldn't answer that question, not fully, not even to himself. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people look the other way. Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, I won't forget this. The afternoon dragged on as Samuel kept watch outside the schoolhouse. A few of the braver children approached him during their afternoon break, curious about the quiet man with the gun on his hip. Are you Miss Whittaker's beau? A girl of about 10 asked boldly. No, Samuel replied, uncomfortable with the direct question. Just a friend. My pa says Frank Tillman's gonna run you out of town, a boy informed him matter-of-factly. Is that so? The boy nodded solemnly. Pa says Mr. Tillman's mean as a snake when he's crossed. Tommy Jenkins. Emma's voice cut in sharply from the schoolhouse door. That's quite enough gossiping. Back inside, all of you. The children scattered, and Emma gave Samuel an apologetic look. Children repeat everything they hear, I'm afraid. It's fine, Samuel assured her. Kids were just being kids. When the school day finally ended and the last child had been sent home, Emma emerged with a stack of papers tucked under one arm. I need to stop by the general store, she told Samuel. Then I should head home and prepare for whatever Mr. Tillman might have planned. They walked together to Holcomb's, where Samuel collected his supplies while Emma purchased a few items of her own. Miss Whittaker, Holcomb said as she was paying, I heard the bank's foreclosing on your place at the end of the month. Is there anything the community can do to help? Emma's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. That's very kind, Mr. Holcomb, but I'll manage somehow. How much do you owe? Samuel asked quietly as they left the store. Emma shot him a sharp look. That's not your concern. I'm making it my concern, she sighed. My father borrowed $200 last year to invest in a mining venture that failed. With interest, I now owe $250. It might as well be $1,000 for all the chance I have of paying it. Samuel did some quick mental calculations. His last cattle sale had brought in $300. He'd planned to use most of it to expand his herd in the fall, but... I could help, he offered before he could think better of it. Emma stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Absolutely not. I don't accept charity, Mr. Reed. Samuel, he corrected automatically, and it wouldn't be charity, it could be a loan. That I have no way of repaying. She shook her head firmly. Thank you, but no, I'll find my own solution. Samuel knew better than to argue with that tone. Instead, he changed the subject. Where's your house? Just past the church on Willow Street. She gestured in that direction. It's not much, but it's home. They walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma's house turned out to be a modest cottage with a small front garden. It looked well kept despite its age, with curtains in the windows and a pot of early spring flowers by the door. Would you like to come in? Emma offered. I can make some coffee. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. He'd already decided to stay in town tonight. He might as well get comfortable. The inside of the cottage was as neat as the outside, with simple but comfortable furnishings. What caught Samuel's attention, though, were the books, shelves and shelves of them lining one entire wall of the small front room. My father's collection, Emma explained, following his gaze. And mine. Books were the one luxury we always allowed ourselves, even when times were lean. Samuel ran his fingers along the spines, reading titles. History, poetry, novels, science. It was an impressive and eclectic collection. I haven't read a book in years, he admitted. Emma looked genuinely shocked. Not one, he shrugged. Not much call for reading on a cattle ranch. But don't you get lonely, don't you miss worlds beyond your own? Samuel had never thought of it that way. I suppose I got used to the quiet. Emma shook her head as if he'd said something incomprehensible. Well, you're welcome to borrow any of these if you'd like. Before Samuel could respond, a rock crashed through the front window, sending glass shards flying across the room. Emma let out a startled cry, and Samuel instinctively pulled her away from the window, shielding her with his body. Are you hurt? He demanded, his hands on her shoulders. She shook her head, eyes wide with shock. No, I don't think so. Samuel moved cautiously to the broken window and peered out. 3 men were standing in the street, Frank Tillman prominent among them. When he saw Samuel, Tillman grinned nastily. Come on out, stranger, he called. Time to settle this. Samuel's hand dropped to his gun. Stay inside, he told Emma. Lock the door behind me. You can't go out there, she protested. There are 3 of them. I've faced worse odds. Samuel checked his Colt, making sure it was fully loaded. Do you have a back door? Emma nodded. Good. If things go badly, run. Get to Mrs. Perkins's or somewhere else safe. Before she could argue further, Samuel slipped out the front door, closing it firmly behind him. He heard the lock click into place as he stepped off the porch to face Tillman and his men. 3 against 1, Samuel observed coolly. Not very sporting of you, Tillman. Tillman spat in the dirt. You should have minded your own business, Reed. Now I'm going to have to teach you a lesson about interfering with a man's property. Miss Whittaker isn't property, Samuel said, his voice dangerously soft. And neither is her house. Now I suggest you boys turn around and walk away before this gets ugly. One of Tillman's companions, a weaselly man with bad teeth, laughed nervously. He's bluffing, Frank. 1 man can't take all 3 of us. Want to bet? Samuel's eyes never left Tillman's face. I've killed better men than you for less. Something in his tone must have conveyed the truth of his words because the weaselly man took a step back. I don't know, Frank. Maybe we should wait. Shut up, Clyde, Tillman snapped. He's just 1 man. His hand hovered near his gun. Last chance to ride out of town, Reed. Not going to happen. For a tense moment, no one moved, then Tillman's hand darted for his weapon. Samuel drew faster, his first shot hitting Tillman in the shoulder before the man could clear his holster. His second shot caught the 3rd man in the leg as he was raising a rifle. The weaselly man, Clyde, threw his hands in the air. Don't shoot, I'm not armed. Samuel kept his gun trained on Tillman, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing. This is over, Tillman, you lost. Like hell it is, Tillman growled, still defiant despite his injury. The door of Emma's cottage opened, and she stepped onto the porch, a shotgun in her hands. Mr. Tillman, I believe Mr. Reed asked you to leave. Clyde was already backing away. Come on, Frank, this ain't worth dying over. Samuel kept his gun ready as the 3 men retreated, Tillman glaring hatred at him the entire time. Only when they were out of sight did he holster his weapon and turn to Emma. Where did you get the shotgun? My father's, she replied, lowering it. I've never fired it, but they didn't need to know that. Despite the tension of the moment, Samuel felt a smile tugging at his lips. You're full of surprises, Emma Whittaker. So are you. She looked at the shattered window and sighed. I suppose I'll need to board that up. I can help with that, Samuel offered. Do you have any spare lumber? Emma nodded. In the shed out back. My father was always starting projects he never finished. As they worked together to board up the window, Samuel found himself watching Emma more than he should. There was something about the determined set of her jaw, the graceful way she moved, that drew his eye. When their hands brushed as she passed him a hammer, that same jolt of awareness he'd felt the day before ran through him. They'll be back, he said as they finished. Tillman's not the type to let this go. Emma's expression was grim. I know, but what can I do? I can't leave my home. You could sell it to someone else, move to Denver, take that teaching position you mentioned. She shook her head. Even if I wanted to, I can't sell a house that the bank is about to foreclose on. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, thinking, what if you had the money to pay off the debt? We've been through this. I won't accept charity. It wouldn't be charity, Samuel insisted. It would be an investment. Emma raised an eyebrow. An investment in what exactly? Samuel wasn't entirely sure himself, but he pressed on. In your future. In the children of this town having a good teacher. And what would you get out of this investment? The question caught Samuel off guard. What did he want? He'd lived alone for so long, convinced himself he preferred it that way, yet in the past 2 days something had shifted inside him. The thought of returning to his empty cabin no longer held the appeal it once did. I don't know, he admitted honestly, but I have the money and you need it. Let me help you. Emma studied him for a long moment. Why do you care what happens to me? It was a fair question, one Samuel wasn't sure he could answer. I'm not entirely sure, he said finally, but I do. Their eyes held for a beat too long, and Samuel felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long dead after the losses he'd suffered. Emma was the first to look away, a flush coloring her cheeks. It's getting late, she said. You should probably head back to Mrs. Perkins's before it gets dark. Samuel nodded, though he was reluctant to leave her alone. Will you be all right here? I'll be fine. I'll keep the shotgun close. She managed a small smile. Thank you for everything, Samuel. He tipped his hat. Lock the door behind me. As Samuel walked back toward the boarding house, his mind was in turmoil. He'd come to town for supplies and somehow gotten himself embroiled in a conflict that wasn't his. He'd offered money he'd been saving for years to a woman he barely knew. None of it made sense, except in a strange way it did. For the first time since the war, since losing his family, Samuel felt something other than the dull acceptance that had become his life. Emma Whittaker, with her books and her courage and her stubborn pride, had awakened something in him he'd thought was dead. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Mrs. Perkins was waiting on the porch when he arrived at the boarding house, her expression concerned. I heard gunshots. Are you all right? Samuel nodded. Had a confrontation with Tillman and his men. No one was killed, but Tillman took a bullet to the shoulder. The widow's eyes widened. Lord have mercy, and Miss Whittaker? She's fine, showed more courage than most men I've known, Mrs. Perkins nodded approvingly. She's a special one, that girl. Reminds me of myself at that age, too stubborn for her own good sometimes, but with a heart as big as the Montana sky. She fixed Samuel with a penetrating look. You care for her, it wasn't a question. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. I've known her 2 days. Some things don't take time, Mrs. Perkins said with the wisdom of years. My Harold and I knew within a week of meeting that we'd spend our lives together. Married for 37 years before the good Lord took him home. Samuel didn't know how to respond to that, so he changed the subject. Any word on when the marshal will return? Should be back by tomorrow noon from what I hear. She held the door open for him. Come in. You look like you could use some dinner and a quiet evening. After a hearty meal that Samuel barely tasted, lost as he was in his thoughts, he found himself once again in the small parlor, staring into the fire. He kept thinking about Emma alone in her cottage, about Tillman's threats, about the inexplicable pull he felt toward a woman he'd just met. His solitary life had been safe, predictable. No attachments meant no pain when those attachments were inevitably severed, yet here he was, contemplating upending everything for a green-eyed schoolteacher with more courage than sense. A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Perkins answered it and a moment later led Emma into the parlor. Look who's decided to be sensible for once, the widow said with satisfaction. Miss Whittaker will be staying with us tonight. Emma looked embarrassed. Mrs. Perkins insisted when she heard about what happened, and I didn't feel entirely safe alone. You made the right decision, Samuel said, rising from his chair. Tillman's not a man to underestimate. Mrs. Perkins excused herself to prepare a room, leaving them alone. I've been thinking about your offer, Emma said after a moment. To help with the bank debt, Samuel nodded, waiting for her to continue. I still can't accept it as charity, she said firmly, but perhaps there's another arrangement we could come to. What kind of arrangement? Emma took a deep breath. You said yourself that ranch life is lonely. That you haven't read a book in years. What if I came with you? As your wife, Samuel stared at her, certain he'd misheard. What? It would be a marriage of convenience, of course, she hurried to explain, her cheeks flushing. You would help me with the debt, and in return I would keep house for you, teach you to enjoy books again, provide companionship. She lifted her chin. It's a practical solution. Samuel was speechless. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, this hadn't even crossed his mind. "You can't be serious," he finally managed. "I'm entirely serious." Her green eyes met his steadily. "You need a wife, and I need to escape Frank Tillman and the bank. It's a logical arrangement." "Marriage isn't about logic," Samuel protested. "And you don't even know me. I could be worse than Tillman. Are you?" "No, but then I'm willing to take the chance." She clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Unless the idea is completely repulsive to you." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of what she was proposing. "Emma, this is insane. You can't just marry a stranger to solve your problems." "Why not? Women do it all the time." "Mail-order brides, arranged marriages, at least in this case. I've met you and know you're a decent man. You don't know anything about me. I know you stepped in when Tillman was threatening me. I know you stayed in town to protect me when you could have left. I know you offered to give me money expecting nothing in return." Her gaze softened. "I know enough." Samuel stood and paced the small room, his mind racing. The idea was preposterous, wasn't it? Yet a part of him, a part he'd thought long dead, thrilled at the thought of having Emma in his home, in his life. "What about your teaching?" he asked. "You love it. My ranch is too far from any town for you to continue." "There will be other opportunities to teach," she said, though he could hear the regret in her voice. "And perhaps in time, as the territory grows." Samuel stopped pacing and faced her. "You would give up everything, your home, your career, your independence, to marry a man you just met." "Not just any man," Emma said quietly. "You." The simple statement hit Samuel with unexpected force. In her eyes, he saw not desperation, but a genuine belief that he was someone worthy of such trust. It humbled him and terrified him in equal measure. "I need to think about this," he said finally. Emma nodded, rising from her chair. "Of course, it's not a decision to be made lightly." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Whatever you decide, Samuel, thank you for everything." After she left, Samuel remained in the parlor for hours, staring into the dying fire. Emma's proposal turned over and over in his mind. The rational part of him knew it was madness. Marriage was meant to be about love, about choice, not a business arrangement between near strangers. Yet the more he thought about it, the more the idea took root. His ranch was successful but lonely. He'd convinced himself he preferred solitude, but these past 2 days had reminded him of what it was like to have someone to talk to care about. And Emma, brave, stubborn, intelligent Emma, was offering him a chance at a different kind of life. By the time he finally went to bed, Samuel had made his decision. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Samuel rose early and found Mrs. Perkins already in the kitchen. "Is Emma, Miss Whittaker, awake yet?" he asked. "Not yet," the widow replied, eyeing him curiously. "She had a difficult time falling asleep, poor dear. The events of yesterday took their toll." Samuel nodded, helping himself to coffee. "When she wakes, would you tell her I've gone to see the banker? I have some business to attend to, Mrs." Perkins raised an eyebrow but didn't question him further. Of course. The Whispering Pines Bank was a sturdy brick building on the main street. Despite the early hour, Samuel found the banker, a thin man named Hargrove, already at his desk. "Mr. Reed," Hargrove greeted him with surprise. "What can I do for you?" Samuel sat across from him. "I understand you hold a mortgage on Emma Whittaker's property." The banker's expression turned guarded. "That's correct, though I'm not sure it's any of your business." "I'm making it my business," Samuel said evenly. "How much would it take to clear the debt entirely?" Hargrove blinked, clearly not expecting this. "Well, the principal was $200. With interest and late fees, the total comes to $267.43. Samuel withdrew a leather pouch from his jacket and counted out the money. "Here's $300. The extra can cover any additional fees." The banker stared at the money, then at Samuel. "May I ask why you're doing this, Mr. Reed? Are you and Miss Whittaker?" "That's between Miss Whittaker and myself," Samuel replied. "I'll need a receipt showing the debt is paid in full, and I want the deed transferred to her name alone, free and clear." Of course, of course." Hargrove busied himself with paperwork, still looking confused. "This is most irregular, but there we are. The debt is cleared and the property remains in Miss Whittaker's name." Samuel took the documents and tucked them into his jacket. "Thank you." His next stop was the marshal's office. To his relief, Marshal Dawson had returned and was reviewing paperwork at his desk. "Reed," the marshal acknowledged him. "Heard there was some excitement yesterday." Samuel nodded. "Tillman and his men came to Miss Whittaker's house. I put a bullet in Tillman's shoulder and one in his friend's leg." The marshal sighed. "Damn it, I knew something like this would happen eventually." He fixed Samuel with a stern look. "Self-defense, they drew first. Any witnesses, Miss Whittaker?" And Clyde didn't catch his last name. He wasn't armed and didn't participate. The marshal made a note. "Clyde Winters, known associate of Tillman's, but more follower than instigator." He tapped his pencil against the desk. "Tillman's been a thorn in my side for years, but his brother-in-law protects him. This time, though, he's gone too far, threatening a woman, damaging property, attempted murder." "Will you arrest him?" "Already have," the marshal said with satisfaction. "Found him at Doc Miller's getting his shoulder patched up. He'll stand trial when the circuit judge comes through next month." He studied Samuel. "You planning to stick around that long?" Before Samuel could answer, the door opened and Emma entered, looking surprised to see him there. "Samuel," she said. "Mrs. Perkins said you'd gone to the bank." "I did." He stood, suddenly nervous. "Could we speak privately?" The marshal rose. "Take your time. I need to make my rounds anyway." He tipped his hat to Emma as he left. When they were alone, Samuel withdrew the documents from his jacket and handed them to her. "The debt is paid. The house is yours, free and clear." Emma stared at the papers, then at him. "You? How? Why?" "I had the money. You needed it." Samuel shifted uncomfortably under her stunned gaze. "It's done." "But why would you do this? We barely know each other." Samuel took a deep breath. "About your proposal last night, a marriage of convenience." Emma's cheeks flushed. "I shouldn't have suggested it." "It was inappropriate and I accept," Samuel interrupted. Emma's mouth fell open. "What?" "I accept your proposal, but not as a business arrangement." Samuel moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Emma, I can't explain it. I've known you 3 days, and yet I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. I don't want a housekeeper or a companion. I want a wife, a real wife." Emma's eyes widened. "Samuel, you don't have to do this. The debt is paid now. I'm free to stay in Whispering Pines." "I know." He squeezed her hands gently. "This isn't about the debt anymore. This is about us. I've been alone for so long I forgot what it was like to care about someone, to want to build a life with someone. You reminded me." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "Are you sure? You hardly know me." "I know enough," Samuel said, echoing her words from the night before. "I know you're brave and stubborn and smarter than anyone I've ever met. I know you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I know I want to spend every day learning more about you." A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. "This is madness." "Probably," Samuel agreed with a small smile, "but I'm tired of being sensible, aren't you?" Emma laughed through her tears. "Completely mad," she repeated, but she was smiling now. "Yes, Samuel Reed, I will marry you. Not for convenience, not for protection, but because in 3 days you've shown me more kindness and respect than any man I've ever known." Samuel felt something tight in his chest loosen, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't felt in years. Without thinking, he pulled Emma into his arms and kissed her. Her lips were soft and sweet, and she fit against him as if she'd been made for him. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "When?" Emma asked, her eyes shining. "When should we marry?" "Today," Samuel said decisively. "If you're willing, we can ask the preacher to perform the ceremony, have a simple dinner at Mrs. Perkins's, and leave for the ranch tomorrow." Emma's eyes widened. "So soon? What about my house, my things? We can come back for them. Or sell the house if you prefer, whatever you want." Samuel cradled her face in his hands. "I just know I don't want to spend another night without you as my wife." "People will talk," Emma warned him. "They'll say it's too fast, that we're being foolish. Let them talk." Samuel had never been more certain of anything in his life. "I spent years being careful, being alone. I'm done with that. I want to start living again, Emma, with you." Emma studied his face for a long moment, then smiled that radiant smile that had captivated him from the beginning. "Today, then. I'll need to speak with Reverend Taylor and make arrangements. And I'll talk to Mrs. Perkins about hosting a small celebration afterward." They left the marshal's office hand in hand, both dazed by the turn of events, but filled with a sense of rightness that defied explanation. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Reverend Taylor, though surprised by the suddenness of the request, agreed to perform the ceremony at 4 o'clock. Mrs. Perkins was delighted to host a wedding supper and immediately began cooking. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by mid-afternoon it seemed everyone knew that the mysterious stranger and their schoolteacher were to be married. Samuel spent part of the day at the general store, selecting a simple gold band for Emma. Holcomb, who seemed to sell everything from harnesses to hair ribbons, produced a small selection of jewelry from beneath the counter. "Never thought I'd see the day," the shopkeeper remarked as Samuel examined the rings. "Miss Whittaker marrying, and to a man she's known less than a week." "When you know," Samuel said simply, selecting a slender band with a small emerald that reminded him of Emma's eyes. Holcomb wrapped the ring carefully. "Well, I wish you both happiness. She's a fine woman, and from what I've seen, you're a man who'll treat her right." As the appointed hour approached, Samuel returned to the boarding house to clean up. He shaved carefully, trimmed his hair as best he could, and put on his one good shirt kept for special occasions he'd never expected to have. Mrs. Perkins knocked on his door just before 4. "It's time," she said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "She's waiting for you at the church." Samuel's heart pounded as he walked the short distance to the small white church. A few townspeople had gathered outside, curiosity overcoming their usual reserve. Inside, candles had been lit despite the early hour, casting a warm glow over the simple space. And there was Emma, standing at the altar beside Reverend Taylor. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn that morning, but had added a white lace collar and pinned a small bunch of early spring wildflowers to her bodice. Her honey-colored hair was arranged in soft curls around her face, and when she turned to look at him, Samuel forgot to breathe. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When Samuel slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he saw her eyes widen in surprise and pleasure at the small emerald. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Taylor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Samuel drew Emma into his arms, hardly able to believe that this remarkable woman was now his wife. Their kiss was tender but filled with promise, and when they turned to face the small gathering of witnesses, Samuel felt a sense of belonging he'd thought he'd never experience again. The celebration at Mrs. Perkins's boarding house was simple but joyful. Several of Emma's students came with their parents, presenting her with small gifts and handmade cards. The marshal attended briefly, offering his congratulations and assuring them that Tillman would remain in custody until his trial. "You two make an unexpected but fitting pair," he told Samuel with a knowing smile. "Sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them." As the evening wore on, Samuel found himself watching Emma as she moved among the guests, her face alight with happiness. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, a private smile meant only for him, and Samuel felt his heart swell with an emotion he was only beginning to recognize as love. Later, after the guests had departed and Mrs. Perkins had tactfully retired to her room, Samuel and Emma found themselves alone in the small room she'd prepared for them. An awkward silence fell between them as they realized the significance of the moment. "I know this isn't conventional," Samuel said finally. "If you need time," Emma silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "I made my choice, Samuel. I chose you." She stepped closer, her green eyes steady on his. "I don't regret it." Samuel gathered her in his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "Nor do I," he murmured against her hair. "Not for a single moment." Their kiss began tentatively, but quickly deepened as months of solitude and years of loneliness melted away in the warmth of their embrace. Samuel had not expected to find love again, had not even been looking for it, yet here it was, offering him a second chance at happiness. And as they discovered each other in the quiet darkness of their wedding night, Samuel knew with absolute certainty that he had ridden into Whispering Pines for supplies, but was leaving with something infinitely more precious, a bride, who had already begun to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Morning brought a flurry of activity as they prepared to leave for Samuel's ranch. Emma packed her most treasured possessions, books primarily, along with a few keepsakes from her parents and enough clothing to see her through until they could return for the rest. She decided to keep her house for now, arranging with Mrs. Perkins to look after it in her absence. "I may want to sell it eventually," she told Samuel as they loaded her trunks onto the wagon he'd rented, "but it's the only home I've ever known. I'm not quite ready to let it go." Samuel understood. "We can come back whenever you want," he promised. "It's only a day's ride." By mid-morning they were ready to depart. A small crowd gathered to see them off. Mrs. Perkins, Holcomb, the Reverend, and several of Emma's students. There were tears and well-wishes, promises to write, and one final piece of news from the marshal. "Just heard from the mayor," Dawson told them quietly. "He's washing his hands of Tillman. Seems shooting a schoolteacher's window out was the last straw. Tillman's bound for the territorial prison once the judge arrives." Emma squeezed Samuel's hand. "That's a relief." As they rode out of town, Emma sitting beside Samuel on the wagon seat, she turned to look back at Whispering Pines one last time, having second thoughts. Samuel asked, suddenly anxious. Emma shook her head, her expression serene. "Not at all, just saying goodbye to one chapter and hello to the next." She smiled up at him. "Our next." The journey to Samuel's ranch took most of the day. As they traveled, Samuel pointed out landmarks, told her about the land, and answered her questions about ranch life. Emma listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed her quick intelligence and genuine interest. "It won't be an easy life," Samuel warned her. "Ranching is hard work and the winters can be brutal." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Emma assured him. "And I imagine winter evenings by the fire with a good book might be quite pleasant with the right company." Samuel smiled, still amazed by the turn his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been a solitary rancher with no thought beyond his next cattle sale. Now he was returning home with a wife, a beautiful, educated woman who'd chosen him despite knowing almost nothing about him. It was madness, as Emma had said. But it was a madness that felt more right than anything had in years. They reached the ranch just as the sun was setting, the fading light gilding the simple log cabin and outbuildings. It wasn't much compared to some of the larger spreads in the territory, but Samuel had built it with his own hands and felt a surge of pride as he helped Emma down from the wagon. "Welcome home," he said, suddenly nervous about what she would think of the modest homestead. Emma took in the cabin, the barn, the corrals, and the stunning view of the mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Truly beautiful." Relief washed over him. "It's not much, but it's perfect," Emma interrupted, squeezing his hand. "It's a place to build a life, our life." Samuel led her into the cabin, watching anxiously as she explored the simple interior. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom off to one side, rough-hewn furniture he'd made himself. It was clean but sparse, with none of the feminine touches that made a house a home. "I know it's not what you're used to," he began. Emma turned to him, her eyes bright. "It's exactly what I hoped for, a place we can make our own." She ran her hand along the mantel. "Perhaps some curtains here, a rug there, your books and mine together on shelves." She smiled up at him. "I can already see it." Samuel drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by the gift he'd been given. "I never thought I'd share this place with anyone, never thought I'd want to." "And now," Emma asked softly, "now I can't imagine it any other way." He kissed her gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Emma Reed." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "Thank you for riding into Whispering Pines that day, for standing up to Frank Tillman, for seeing something in a stubborn schoolteacher that made you want to stay." As night fell over the ranch, Samuel built a fire in the hearth while Emma prepared a simple meal from the provisions they'd brought. They ate at the rough-hewn table, talking easily about plans for the future improvements to the cabin, expanding the herd, perhaps starting a small school for the children of neighboring ranches once word got out that a qualified teacher lived in the area. "We could add a room," Samuel suggested, warming to the idea, "a proper schoolroom with desks and a blackboard." Emma's eyes lit up. Would that be possible? Anything's possible, Samuel replied, surprising himself with his own optimism. This land is growing, more families arriving every month. Those children will need education. And in the meantime, I can help with the ranch, Emma said decisively. I may not know much about cattle, but I'm a quick learner. Samuel smiled, imagining Emma in a split riding skirt helping him round up strays. I don't doubt that for a moment. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of the bedroom, Emma's head resting on his shoulder, Samuel found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone about his family in Virginia, lost during the war, about the years of drifting afterward, trying to outrun grief, about finding this piece of land and slowly, painstakingly, building something that was his alone. Not alone anymore, Emma murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest right over his heart. Not ever again. And Samuel, who had convinced himself that solitude was safer than connection, that the absence of pain was preferable to the risk of loss, felt the last of his defenses crumble. He gathered his wife closer, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together. I rode into town for supplies, he whispered into the darkness. How did I end up with you? Emma's laugh was soft against his skin. Divine providence, blind luck. Or perhaps just two lonely souls recognizing something in each other that no one else could see. Whatever it was, Samuel was grateful beyond words. He'd gone to Whispering Pines expecting nothing more than flour and coffee. Instead, he'd found a partner, a friend, a lover, a woman who saw past his gruff exterior to the man beneath, who challenged him and comforted him in equal measure. In the weeks and months that followed, Samuel and Emma settled into a rhythm of life on the ranch. True to her word, Emma proved to be a quick study when it came to ranch work, learning to ride astride to help with the cattle, to manage the household with efficiency and grace. Samuel, in turn, discovered the joy of evenings spent reading aloud from one of Emma's beloved books, of conversations that stretched late into the night, of simple meals made special by the company they shared. Word spread about the schoolteacher at Reed Ranch, and by summer's end, 3 families from neighboring spreads had arranged for their children to come for lessons 3 days a week. Samuel made good on his promise, adding a room to the cabin that served as a schoolhouse during the day and a library in the evenings. They returned to Whispering Pines several times to collect the rest of Emma's belongings, to testify at Tillman's trial, which resulted in a 5-year sentence in the territorial prison, and eventually to sell Emma's house to a young doctor and his wife who had just arrived from the east. Are you sure? Samuel asked as they watched the new owners take possession of the cottage Emma had grown up in. It's your last link to your parents. Emma shook her head, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their first child was growing. Not the last link, she corrected him. I have their books, their memories, and the lessons they taught me. She smiled up at him. Besides, our child should grow up knowing that home isn't a place, it's the people you love. Samuel covered her hand with his, still amazed at the miracle of their child growing beneath his palm. When did you get so wise, Mrs. Reed? I've always been wise, Mr. Reed, she teased. It just took you a while to notice. As they rode back to their ranch, Samuel reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken in less than a year. He'd gone from a solitary existence to being a husband, soon to be a father, and the center of a growing community. All because he'd ridden into town for supplies one spring day and found himself defending a green-eyed schoolteacher with more courage than sense. Their son was born the following winter, a healthy boy they named James, after Emma's father. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Samuel's mother. The Reed Ranch prospered, expanding to include more cattle, horses, and eventually a proper schoolhouse where Emma taught not only their own children, but those from ranches and farms for miles around. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Samuel would often look at his wife, her honey-colored hair now streaked with silver, her green eyes still bright with intelligence and love, and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. What are you thinking? Emma would ask, catching his gaze. And Samuel, a man of few words who had learned from his wife the value of expressing what was in his heart, would simply say that I rode into town for supplies and came home with everything I never knew I needed.